How we do this, we are the truest. Got these fangs super sharp, your shit toothless. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish. In the graveyard, acting foolish. Finna dance with the devil to no music. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of a podcast called Ghoulish. I am Max Booth, a host, an undead host even, and I am wrestling a dachshund in my lap whose name is Frank. Say hi, Frank. Oh, I guess he's not going to. Anyway, I have today another live episode from the Ghoulish Book Fest that happened at the end of May 2022 in downtown San Antonio, if you missed it. On today's episode, it is the Small Town Hill panel, which I moderated, and it featured, let's see if I can recall the panelists without looking it up, Tom Deady, Victoria Nations, Bob Pastorella, and Jessica Leonard. Heck yeah. Those who were on the panel. I wasn't supposed to moderate it, but I ended up moderating it anyway, because the one I did have moderating, unfortunately, couldn't come to the fest after all, which is okay. Things happen. I had no idea what to talk about, though, because I neglected to plan anything. And the topic of small towns is kind of vague. So I kind of began this panel by just demanding someone define what a town is. It's a fun time. I think it's a fun panel. I think folks will enjoy it. I am recording this intro at 12:20 a.m. It is officially Friday, May 13th. I will be uploading the episode as soon as I finish with this introduction. If you are listening to it on the same day, on Friday, May 13th, I will be in Houston, specifically Katy, Texas, this evening on Friday. I will be hosting a double feature of Basket Case and Brain Damage at the Katy, Texas Alamo Draft House, and doing a reading from Maggot Screaming, along with a book signing after the two movies. It's going to be a fun time. I know it's almost sold out. I think like the front row still has seats available. Just go over to the Houston Draft House website. If you live nearby and you want to come, do it. It's like $12 for both movies. Total, just a $12 ticket, and you get to see two great movies and to see me read about human decomposition. I even bought a mad scientist white lab coat for this. It cost me $50, and I ripped the tag off by accident. Didn't mean to, because I was going to take it back after this. Oh well, I guess I need to incorporate this jacket into more performances in the future. My mistake. I think that's all I have to say. I'm pretty tired. It's been a shitty week. The AC broke, but it finally was fixed earlier today, and which was good, because I was melting from the heat. I live in Texas. It's hot. I don't like the heat. It's not great. I don't like it. Go over to ghoulishbooks.com and buy some books. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/PMM Publishing. Review the podcast on iTunes, and go rob a grave. That would be cool. Go take a disrespectful photo on top of someone's remains. I promise, it's fine. They're dead. It's A-okay, baby. Now here's an episode about small towns, I guess. and welcome to a panel at the Ghoulish Book Fest. I am Max Booth, a Pilsen, who could be called a host. He is moderating this panel, and he is me. Hello, and welcome. I have people also sitting next to me, and they will now introduce themselves, beginning from my right, your left. I think that's stage left? Yes, it is. Stage left, Tom. Let's do it.
Hi, everybody. Tom Deady. I write horror fiction. My first novel, Haven, won the Bram Stoker Award for Best First Novel. I've since published a bunch of novellas, short stories, novels, short story collection, and I have my first young adult horror novel called The Clearing available now.
Hello, my name is Victoria Nations, and I write short stories, I write gothic horror, and I write about monsters that usually have a lot of emotional baggage.
Hello, I'm Bob Pastorella. I'm the co-host of This Is Horror, and I'm the author of Mojo Rising, and with my co-host, we wrote They're Watching, which is a good book.
Who's your co-host?
Oh man, my co-host is Michael David Wilson, who is not here.
Hi, my name is Jessica Leonard. I'm the author of Antioch, which is my first novel that was put out by Perpetual Motion, who is a press that is here, and it's for sale downstairs. So feel free to jump on that. I write horror that mostly does take place in a small town. So
Yeah, let's give it up for small towns. So I thought we would begin this panel by defining a town. Tom?
Well, towns have people that live in it, and yeah, this is awkward.
Pretty hot take, Tom.
So the funny thing is, I thought I grew up in a small town. I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts, and when I look back now, it was not a small town. It's actually one of the larger cities in Massachusetts, but I lived in a very isolated neighborhood, kind of, so to me a small town is somewhere where you think you know everyone in the town, and you know the policeman waved to you, the priest is known to everybody, and there's kind of this cast of characters that you could almost pick up from any one small town and put to another one, and that fit right in. There's always the town crazy person that walks around talking to themselves and directing traffic and doing weird shit, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess you'd know it when you see it.
It's a pretty good definition. Would anyone disagree? Any conflict? No, okay. We all agree of what Tom said. That is what a town is. Small town even. Not a big, so this is a panel about small towns. We're not talking about big towns, not even medium towns. This is a panel only strictly about small towns. Now, I think I grew up in a small town in Indiana, and everything you said, I agree with that. Except I didn't know anyone, really, and no one waved at me, so I guess it's the opposite. But this is a pretty vague topic, so let's just go around talking about what your experience is with small towns, and then we will maybe, I assume, move on to small towns in fiction. So you just said that, Tom. What about you, Vicky? Victoria?
Either's fine. So I'm originally from Orlando, Florida. Then I moved to a very small town. So my experience with a small town was, oh my God, what is happening? But I think the way you describe it is exactly right, where everybody seems to know each other, and not only know each other, but know each other's family, know each other's business, know what happened 100 years ago in each other's family, and it's very insular. And that it kind of has a personality of its own. So coming in as an outsider, which is something that when we do talk about fiction, I always think is interesting, being the outsider in a small town whose history is not known is kind of causing a disruption to that. So that was my experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. Bob?
All I've ever known is small town. That's all I've ever lived in. I've never had the opportunity to live in a big city. And I don't live out in the rural areas, which is good. I've seen the Blair Witch, and I don't want to live out in anywhere that would be considered like living and camping at the same time. But being in a small town, the thing that I've noticed is like what you're talking about is how there's, kind of an insular community. Everyone knows each other, but we've seen it go from everyone used to keep their doors unlocked to now you're locking your doors. You don't know your neighbors very well. And I think there's a dichotomy there that you can still do horror in the small town. It's not overdone because the way that society has changed. And you don't really know your neighbors that well. Or you think you know your neighbors well. And you don't know that they're like having like crazy sex orgies in their basements and things like that. So who knows? But that's all I've ever known. I don't think I could write anything about a metropolitan type world because I don't know it.
So I grew up in a small town. It's Hanson, Kentucky. If you want to try and find it, you probably can't. It has literally one stoplight, no police, 6 churches though, so like one for each of us. But worse than still, I grew up not even within the city. I was on a tobacco farm miles out from that. So it was not even the experience of having a small town, it was the experience of having no neighbors at all and being able to do kind of whatever you wanted out there because no one was checking up on you. And so I think that's part of it. People think, oh, we know all of our neighbors, like you were saying, but really everyone has a secret that they don't want to get out, and it's easier to keep when there's a big distance in between you and your neighbors.
So what, I mean, that is true. Every small town kind of has like that big thing, right, that everybody talks about. So what is the big thing from each of those small towns?
Oh, yeah, so I said I was from Hanson. There's a bigger small town right next to it, and that's Madisonville, and we've had one really exciting murder because it was a rich lady, and there's documentaries about it, and there's a book, and they called it Murder in Mayberry. So that was a big thing, and our police force was like, oh, they were embarrassed all the time because they had no idea how to deal with a murder. It didn't happen there. So that's our big crime thing for that area is we still call it the murder house to this day.
So I have to ask because I've read Antioch, as you know.
I'm glad.
I've read it a few times, and that book is about a woman in a small town obsessing over that town's like big crime thing going on.
Yeah.
So like growing up, did you do similar things in that town, like obsessing over these true crime details of the things local to you?
So you kind of had to, and especially because I was saying like people were saying the cops weren't doing anything because they had no idea what to do. So as a citizen in a tiny little town, you sort of want to take it upon yourself to be like, oh, I can do this. I can solve this. I personally kind of obsess about a lot of things that are much bigger than me, and that's okay. But I'm like, I'll solve those zodiac letters, just you wait. But yeah, so the idea of a character fixating and thinking, I have something I can contribute to a major murder case is like, yeah, doesn't everyone think that in my mind?
I think by the end of this panel, we will solve a homicide. Bob, what about you? Anything spring to mind?
Well, I grew up, the school I went to, we had basically one of our students, he didn't graduate, but he became the most notorious inmate in Texas death row. And so we went to school with this guy, and it's just one of those things. It's like, hey, did you hear about what happened? So-and-so killed someone, and those of us that have grown up with him was like, oh, again? Because he killed someone when we were in school, and they basically said that it was a hunting accident. And so it's like the second time, it's like, well, maybe the first one wasn't a hunting accident either. Huh. But, and so, and this guy, you can read about him. His name is Monty Delk. He was Texas death row's most notorious inmate. He's had articles written about him. He's been executed. I think they've actually changed some of the protocols because of him. They put metal plates in the walls because he would beat his head on the walls until the plates broke, just, to do it. He would smear his body excrement on himself to keep other inmates away from him. And so, but it's one of those things. It's like a secret. We don't really talk about it, you know. And you bring it up to people you went to school with, and they're like, "Oh yeah, thank God he's dead," you know. And it's just one of those things, and that's it. It seems like that where I grew up, that we had a lot of crime that nobody wanted to talk about. There's a lot of drugs, and people were robbing people things out of people's houses. And you start digging deeper, and you find out that other people had killed someone and things like this. And there's always a secret. Like we're saying, there's always something. There's always something that's going to be, that you got to pull up from the depths, and it comes back to bite you, you know, later on. So that's what I get out of it.
All right. Go ahead.
So the small town I lived in had about 5,000 people, so we were the county seat, so, you know, big deal. But one thing that was, we don't have any famous murders, but talking about secrets, I think what really struck me was that everybody was in each other's business. That was something I didn't have in a city. And people knew about the exploits. People knew who was growing pot out on, you know, the back 40. They knew about the cocaine parties and the sex orgies. We don't have basements, so I'm sure they were doing them on the lawn or something. But, you know, they knew these were like open secrets. But when you were in the workplace or people going to church and everything, everybody acted like they were perfectly respectable by their definition of respectable people. And yet these open secrets were just out there and were constantly discussed. And that kind of duality, that dichotomy, like you said, it's just, you know, there's a cognitive dissonance there. And it's like, we're pretending we are all this way, but actually there's a faction that are this way.
Well, I don't want to visit any of the towns that you guys grew up in. Yeah, so like I said, Malden was a big city, but it felt to me like a small town. The biggest thing I can think of happening when I was growing up there was the local theater, which was this beautiful, beautiful old school theater with like red velour everywhere and curtains, and it had a balcony. It was really cool. When I was in high school, they showed the Led Zeppelin movie, The Song Remains the Same, and for whatever reason I wasn't there. It caused a riot, and they set the theater on fire, and they were ripping up the seats to get the stuffing from the seats to fuel the fire. So that was big excitement in Malden back in the day.
So you say for some reason you weren't present. That sounds like you caused this.
No, I had a thing somewhere else. Yeah.
Totally out of town.
Yeah, I was in church.
Led Zeppelin, what's that?
Well, the other big claim to fame for Malden is Norman Greenbaum, who sings Spirit in the Sky, that classic rock song, graduated from Malden High. So there you go.
So that backmasking lyrics.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Right?
so that
It's all
brings up-
coming together.
I'm still
trying to get a grasp on. They started a riot during The Song Remains the Same, which is like a trippy concert movie. There's nothing violent in there.
Go figure.
Did they like get mad over Jimmy Page or something?
It's funny because I'm like on this Facebook page for like, it's called Malden Back in the Day, and the subject comes up, and even the people that were there, like, I don't remember why this happened.
It's like a fucking Stephen King novel. Like, oh no, once we left town, we all conveniently forgot about this clown.
Yeah, right. So we have one of the biggest, I think there's a set of towns in Texas actually that has the oldest Thanksgiving Day football game rivalry in the country, but Malden Medford is like the second oldest.
Yeah.
So we always just blamed everything on Medford. So I assume it was kids from Medford came in and did that. It wasn't us guys.
You know, and here's the thing, there's probably this one guy who's like still alive going, that's the day I put the acid in the water.
He's on the panel.
Yes, right about it.
It all happened just the way I planned.
We have the guy. I told you we would solve a homicide.
There you go.
We solved like 8 homicides. I assumed like 10 people died.
Sure.
We solved it. That's the Ghoulish Book Con guarantee. You come to this convention, we solve homicides. I do like the idea of small towns having like enemy towns. That's really funny to me. Really like Springfield and Shelbyville. I didn't have that. Did anyone else have that?
I do, yeah. And here's the sad thing is that my hometown recently became viral They were the kids who did the Indian dance at Disneyland. So that I went to that school.
Yeah.
They, on the record, I'll say they've been needing to change their mascot. Just because some Cherokees gave you permission 50 years ago doesn't mean they give you permission now. So there is a rivalry where it's like when I graduated high school, my class was the first class that lost to the other team, the neighboring city football team. You know, yeah, we were the losers. You know, and they told us that we were losers, and we basically told them we didn't care. So, you know, and I think it was 1985, so things have changed, but they still have this, you know, oh my God, it's the Midnight Madness, it's Mid-County Madness, and all this kind of stuff, and it's like this big rivalry, and who cares?
So in movies with stuff like this, usually like the football team travels to the other football team and they like, I don't know, like fucking take the town goat and do something with it. Did you guys do anything like that?
You really don't have to travel. You can literally walk to the other side because they're like right there. As a matter of fact, where I live, I could throw a rock to the other city. And it's not even a hard throw. So I mean, it's like they're all just like right
That's
there.
pretty fucking impressive. How far can you throw a rock?
And it's about maybe where I can stand to do it is about 15 feet. I can just chunk it. I'm in another city.
Dude, that is badass.
What about them mountains?
No, yeah. I didn't
what
play
about you,
football. I was in the
Jessica?
band.
So within the same town, we had North High School, which is where I went, and then Central. And somehow we had the gall to say that Central was the redneck high school, which, like I said, I grew up on a farm. We were no one to be throwing stones, not even 15 feet.
Just to cut you off, Bob is the one to throw stones.
Yes. But yeah, it would be like Central. They drive their tractors to school. And then, I don't know what we were accomplishing with that, but yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Nothing cool.
I wish I had something cool, but I don't. I mean, my main like small town mystery is like who set the porta potty into flames and just melted it. And I'm gonna tell you who it was, folks. It was me. It was the talk of the town. It was myself and a friend, and we just lit it up because it was cool. It was a cool thing to do. And you know what? I was a kid, so come at me, cops.
That is the least surprising story I've heard all day.
Also, like I'm thinking of like when I was in Little League and stuff, like my mom and some friends, they would help at the concession stand, and everybody knew everybody who would go to the field, and like my mom's friend, who was really religious, was also stealing money from the concession stand, and it was and like everyone kind of knew, but no one wanted to say anything, and I feel like small towns like close to being mafias sometimes. I don't know. I had nothing to follow that up with. I hoped you would applaud.
That's definitely a thing where, so if you're a kid in a small town, you have to make your own fun.
Yeah.
There's nothing there built in for you to do, so you're dying of alcohol poisoning in a cornfield, or
Absolutely.
you're stealing stuff, or setting up a porta potty on fire.
Well,
So
throwing,
there's definitely like, you have to entertain yourself.
I'm no Bob, but we definitely used to throw rocks at trains. That was a fun thing to do. How else did you guys occupy time in small towns? What a great panel.
We drove out to the power lines, which I assume is like a cornfield. You know, it's and you had to make sure you didn't get stuck, so you didn't have to call your dad and try to explain why you're out in the middle of the woods under the power lines.
Tom?
Our town had an annual fishing derby that was a big deal. Yeah, they stocked what they called the reservoir, even though it wasn't a reservoir. They stocked it with fish, and they'd open it up, and you could, if you didn't have a fishing rod, because we were poor back in the day, they'd give you this like 6-foot bamboo rod with a piece of string and a little Dixie cup full of worms, and expect you to catch fish. When we got older, we would hang around at the same reservoir drinking, and drinking in the woods like every other teenager, I guess. Break into the MDC pool, the public pool, to swim at night. Big time stuff. Yeah.
It's pretty riveting, man.
You know, I grew up on the wild side. I'm not gonna lie.
You fucking killed like what, 18 people in that riot?
Yeah.
And then you came on a panel.
I was hoping there was
going to
be stuffed cushions here and I could recreate the scene, but
I imagine at one point before this fest is done, you could kill 18 people and it would be fine. No one read the fine print and the badge, but homicide's allowed. Always allowed. So I imagine all of us on this panel they've written about small towns, and I would love you guys to talk about that specifically, like, how do you create a small town when you write a book? Because how much are you outlining, like, okay, well, that's that Phil's and he lives in that street, maybe we might write about him at one point, but I know he lives in that street. Like, how much of the small town are you creating in your head as you write these small town books? Begin with Tom, and we'll just go this way.
So Haven, for instance, is kind of a patchwork of where I grew up in Malden, the first house I owned as an adult in a little town called Rockland, Massachusetts. So I kind of weave in a bunch of different pieces and parts to create my own fictional town. But again, I think there's a set of staple characters that exist, and some people call it a cliche, but I have the friendly priest, and I have the cop. Is he a good cop or a bad cop? Because that's always a thing. And that's the cool thing about, I think, the dichotomy that Bob mentioned, is where you think you know everybody and you can trust your neighborhood cop, but can you? No. You don't know. So yeah, my fictional towns are really kind of a patchwork of different places I've lived and grew up or lived as an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think something very similar to that too is that, sometimes you end up with iconic characters. I try and create that isolation, where you kind of have folks who are all experiencing similar things because they are living very close to each other, but the outside world, outside that town, is much more isolated, to try and create that insular feeling and that where they're kind of bumping up against each other rather than outside coming in.
Yeah, that's a great point about small towns. And, well, I'll get to you guys in a second. But I think the reason why we love them in books and movies is because it has that confined feel to it, but also being expansive enough to have a small civilization that kind of lives on an island almost, because no one really goes outside of that town. Nothing outside of that town is real to someone who lives in a small town. Bob?
So I have a go-to small town. It's called Grigsby. And when I started writing about Grigsby, I wanted to do like a map. So I actually drew out what I wanted Grigsby to look like. And I wanted it to have certain characteristics that I've experienced through several different cities. And I realized that for Grigsby to actually have all of these things, that it could not actually exist in any type of real sense. So I'm like, screw that. Grigsby also has a beach, because it's near the coast, but it's inland. So I make it work. But I do have like landmarks that, that have gone into, several stories that are, that I think that people, if they see that, they'll see like an Easter egg. I try not to make it like it's a big deal, like in Grigsby, Texas this time, So it's not anything like that, but, they got May's Diner, things like that, and, where you're going to go eat. And I try to make it to where it's just an very subtle overarching thing. And because of that, I had to create another city that was a little bit more arty, a little bit more metropolitan, called Marin. And it also has a weird psychogeography. It doesn't fit anywhere. It really shouldn't even be where it's supposed to be. So I might just have a city that moves. So it'd be weird.
Cities don't move.
Well, this one will.
Remember when we set up what towns were? That was not part of it.
This is can you look at this? What does that say? Small town?
It could be a town that moves, yes. A town
Well,
that
that's
moves.
fine. That's acceptable.
I
Jessica?
did say city. It's kind of interchangeable.
Yeah. So yes, Antioch is a completely fictional town because I did not want anyone to tell me there's no way they could walk from here to here in this amount of time. I wanted to make sure it was all made up, so I didn't have any geography problems. But I did plot it out quite a bit, and it's a bigger town than the one I grew up in. It's got way more stuff. They have restaurants. They probably have like 30 churches in Antioch. But then I couldn't stick with that one, so I'm writing something new, and I had to make up a whole new town. I can't stay in the same one because there was a serial killer in that one, and I feel like somebody would have to mention it, and then it becomes weird to me. But yeah, I spent a lot of time plotting out, okay, so there's got to be a river, and these sorts of things are what's near a river, and then there's got to be them downtown, and this is what is downtown, and no percent probably of that made it into the book, but I needed to know it in order to know what I was doing, sort of.
When I write about small towns sometimes, there's a website I like to use called newspapers.com. It's a great website that has basically any newspaper that was ever published, and you can just read it. So sometimes, like research-wise, I like to just, if my book is taking place, say, in 1955 in Los Alamos, that's really specific because I am writing a book in 1955 in Los Alamos. I would just type that into the database and find the local rag. I've never called a newspaper a rag. That was pretty cool, right? And I'll just read them to find out what was going on around then, any crazy controversies in town that would be fun to write about. Like, I know people now have a lot of opinions about daylight savings, but holy fuck were they mad about it in 1955. they would advertise fucking weekly meetups to talk about this. It's insane. You only find that out by researching these towns. And I would say anyone who's interested in writing about a small town, you could just pick a town at random that could be like the duplicate of the town you were writing about, and just pick a date and time and read up about crazy shit going on in that town. It's so great for research. Like, how do you guys also research these books?
Yeah, same. I used to go back. They used to have these set of books called like What Happened in the Year, right? So you'd be able to set everything to that tone, like, oh, this was the big movie that year, this was the big song, whatever, this sports team won a championship. But I do the same thing with the town, like researching, what, to your point, you look at these old newspapers and say, what would a newspaper, like my book took place in '78, so what were the big stories, not so much national stories, but to your point, like, what were people talking about in the small towns? And there's a lot of great resources. I'm gonna have to get that one from you, but I used a lot of old newspapers in just random old towns just to get a flavor of like what people were actually talking about back then.
Not only that, but also what was being advertised, like
right.
what products is like
like how much things cost,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating. You really get down some rat holes doing the research.
Yeah.
I love the newspaper idea.
Yeah.
I look at archival photos a lot because it really helps me kind of see what the place is. Like I'm working on a story, and there's a lock and dam that I know about on a river. But I was wondering, like, when was this built? How did they build it? Kind of what was that setting? Because I actually want to do more of a generational, not generational memory and trauma kind of thing. And so it's really kind of like, okay, is it their grandfather? Would it be their great grandfather? Who built that dam? How is that affecting this? What's transpired? What is hidden underneath that dam that might crawl out? And so I'd really like photographs for that to help me get that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Bob?
Interviewing people. That is one of the things that I've learned. I haven't done it in a while, but I remember I was working on a story about a serial killer in a small town. So I called up my hometown local sheriff and met with him, and it was very illuminating. A lot of small town police departments do not have the budget to work with that kind of stuff. That it's their biggest fear, that they have something as serial. They will try to make sure that they solve the thing as quickly as possible, because if they can't, they are forced to call in outside help. They don't now have a choice. So that's something that you need to know. Your small town cop probably isn't, isn't going to work a big, multi-murder serial killer case. He's going to have assistance. Not saying that you can't do it, but it's you're going to have some outside help. They just typically don't have the budget for the forensics and things like that they need to apprehend these perpetrators. And that was very enlightening. Also, talking to them about, hey, what type of crimes do you see? Get into specifics, and it's usually drugs, larceny. But then they'll tell you about some. They won't tell you no names, but they'll tell you usually something weird, and you'll be like, "Oh, wait, hold on. Let me write that down."
Well, hold on. What did they tell you?
When I went and talked to our local sheriff, he told us that he said they had a bunch of middle-aged women that were running a prostitution ring that had something to do with cocaine and stuff like that. So it was tied in with drugs. And he says these weren't like young women; these were middle-aged women, the type of people that you would never, ever associate with this. And he goes, and right here in the town. And I was like, that's bullshit. He's like, no, it's real. He goes, it really happens. We've arrested people. So I was like, wow, my small town is crazy.
I would like to add that the Ghoulish Book Fest is completely acceptable of sex vehicles of all ages, assuming they all legal. Jessica.
I actually, in my town, we do have a historical society, and that was a huge thing for me to be able to find out weird little things. My grandmother, growing up, she would always be like, well, because we had a historic home, so she'd be like, well, we're taking this to the historical society to give it to their collection. And I was like, that sounds insane, but our historian's name is Carl, and he does a really great job of keeping all that stuff up. So if you need to know anything from the past, several hundred years at this point, they can help you. Several was too big, probably 150, but several.
400.
Back in the dawn of time.
Giving us too much credit there. Giving Carl too much credit, honestly.
Like with dinosaurs.
What are some good small town books and movies you guys like? I think the big one obviously is Stephen King's Castle Rock. Sometimes I think that's the goal almost. If I could create something like Castle Rock that could become familial with all the people reading my books, and any other book I bring up, they go, oh shit, we're going back to this place, baby. And he's done that 5 times, and I don't know, maybe it's just because he writes so much. But what books and movies would you guys recommend?
For me, the holy trinity of small town coming of age type books is It, Summer of Night, and Boy's Life. Just Haven is almost like a love letter to some of those books. But I think if folks haven't read this, the most recent compelling small town for me in literature is Josh Mallerman's Goblin. I need more Goblin stories, man. I got to know what's going on in that town. That is just fascinating to me.
That's a great book. I love Goblin, and Boy's Life. God damn, what a book.
Yeah.
It's such a good book. I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Well, I just finished Christy DeMeester's book, Such a Pretty Smile, and it is a generational book, where there's something happening in the parents' generation as well as something happening with current characters. And I really love that you have, because it is a small town, people who were interacting 20, 30, 40 years ago are still interacting. And I think that's one of the things I love about small towns. As far as an older, more established author, Shirley Jackson does insular communities excellently. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is amazing about both an isolated insular family within this judgmental town that's all very small but around them.
Yeah.
It's really exceptionally done.
The Gulp, Alan Baxter. Yeah. If you want to check out some Australian weirdness, check out The Gulp. They just got the second issue, or the second book, second volume. It's a mosaic novel in 2 volumes of a town called Culpeper, and it swallows people up. So definitely check it out.
I think a little differently, because my first experiences with a small town horror was Fear Street books, R.L. Stine. So everything was within Shadyside, and I read all of them, and it's like, how did all of this happen in this one town? And it did seem very small, like a snow globe idyllic town where bad shit happened every day.
It's a bad place to live.
It didn't seem fun. I mean, it did seem fun, but not if you were there.
I'm thinking like a lot of people say that small towns are dead, and I disagree with that. But I do think there's a big difference between like small towns from the 80s and 90s in fiction and small towns now. And I assume that a lot of that just has to do with the way the internet has evolved and how like small towns will just like located on fucking Nextdoor now. You just go into an app and you go, hey, you see that guy? Racist. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, I don't have any thoughts on Nextdoor.
Are you guys on Nextdoor?
No, yeah, I don't touch that. There's enough. Yeah, no. I think you're right. The internet has changed small towns and cell phones as well. Like it's much harder to develop that sense of isolation and feeling that you can't get help because everybody has GPS. You can't get lost. Yeah. Everybody has a flashlight. If it gets dark, everybody has a phone. Like it has changed that perspective, which is maybe why I write books based a long time ago, so I don't have to deal with technology. But I think the technology has made a big difference in what small towns look and act like today versus 40 years ago.
Yeah. Fuck technology. Bob? Any thoughts about how technology has killed small towns?
I think that people are more secretive now than ever before, to be honest with you, because of technology.
Yeah.
That they have to hide and be extremely skillful on how they're hiding the things that they don't want other people to know about. And that's I brought that up earlier. That's what's changed. What I see, what's happened in small towns, and it goes back to this real simple notion. We used to lock our door. We used to keep our doors unlocked. I remember growing up in my house that you could walk out of the house, you never locked the doors. And I remember at a certain point when my dad was like, the people across the street are weird, we're locking all the doors. And you're like, but they're cool people, and he painted that beautiful picture of that leaf on the middle of the street. My dad's like, we're locking the doors. So my mom's like, we never lock the door.
What the fuck are you talking about? Leaf?
Yeah. The kid across the street, he spray painted a giant marijuana leaf in the middle of the street.
I thought maybe they were like Canadian.
No.
Well, then you better lock your doors.
Absolutely. I don't know if I've stated this, but no Canadians allowed at Ghoulish Book Festival. Jessica.
I think if you're telling the story of a small town today, you're telling a story of change and how things have moved on. Mm-hmm. It's very much, if you're walking the streets of your small town, you should be able to identify that used to be the movie store, that used to be the hardware store, and it's not that way anymore. Walmart kind of killed the small town, and so anything that is thriving with a small business still is hanging on by a thread, and you've got to go there a bunch, guys. That's the moral. Please visit your locally owned businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good... Are you okay? Any questions about small towns? Yeah.
Thoughts if any of the panel have read the recent Joe Lansdale book called Moon Lake?
Has anyone read Moon Lake?
It's supernatural, but isn't.
I haven't read Moon Lake, but I've read a lot of his books, and he tends to do small towns just so
He
terrific.
does,
Yeah.
yeah.
I can't believe I
haven't
didn't
read
even
that
think
one
of
yet.
him. Yeah.
Shame on you, Max.
Have you read it?
No.
Have you read it?
I started reading it, but I got involved
Shame
in
on
another
me?
project.
Bob, I will throw a rock at you.
I can throw it better.
Okay, any other questions about small towns? What is a small town? We did that. Don't ask that. No, nothing at all. Okay, great. I mean, we have like 9 minutes left. We can just wrap if you guys want to go like to the bathroom and hang out until the next reading. Yes.
Is there an advantage to sharing your story in a small town as opposed to a big, monolithic urban setting where sometimes we get murdered by races?
Look at this guy with a question. Amazing question. Let's all talk about that.
So, I think one of the advantages is, well, one is the sense of isolation again. If you're in a big city, it feels like you could always, run out in the street and there's somebody to help you. But I think another thing is, and like I said, some of the characters and, the gazebo on the town green and all that sound cliche, but I think the readers have a sense of familiarity to that type of living and can like immerse themselves into the setting better. I don't know. I've never lived in a really big city, and so I couldn't really write about it anyway, but I don't know. I think it's more for the reader to feel that sense of either isolation or dread or, maybe, hey, that sounds just like any town USA where I grew up. So they kind of embrace it that way.
I think it's a tool in your toolbox. I think if you set something in a large city where you're anonymous, people don't have the connections. I think that there is a sense of isolation and not getting help. Maybe even though somebody might be out there,
Right.
They may just walk past you if you're bleeding on the street. That concept, like that's a very powerful setting for a horror story. Or you can go claustrophobic and people in each other's business, and everybody suspects everybody else. They're both very powerful settings that I think it's kind of like, what do you want to make the reader feel? Because you could use it to either one.
2 amazing answers. One would think, can't top these. Bob?
I mean, the only thing I can do is agree is to me though, I think that in a big city, I guess because I've never lived there, that I would probably feel more isolated in a big city because I tend to be more of a private person. So I mean, there is, in the times that I visit a big city, I felt very overwhelmed. And especially being outside and getting in crowds and things like that, it's just, I have to basically step out. I feel like that guy who's going to go up against the wall and just let people walk past him going, because I'm just like, I'm not used to this. I'm used to having some space and not people getting into my personal space. But in a big city, people are getting into your personal space. So I think that even though, you can have a more socially active thing if you're that type of person, that the big city can be just as horrifying to somebody, especially if they're not, as into having people get that close to them, whereas in a small town, that you have family, you have community, things like that. So there is a sense of isolation, but you're supposed to have like the surface level of community, and you go to the football game and all that kind of stuff. So either way it can go. It's just, I think the big city, you got more people, more bad things can happen. So
I think I couldn't believably make up a fake big city. You know it. If I tell you there's a place called Hanson, Kentucky, where I grew up, you all believed that. You don't know it's true. But
Are you lying?
no.
Are you lying?
I'm telling stories. But yeah, if it was a city and I was like, there were 3 million people there, you'd be like, no, there weren't. That doesn't make any sense. So that's all.
All right. Any little questions about towns, smallness, the size of towns? No? Excellent. Well, that's what I love to see. No questions. Let's wrap it up, folks. Give applause.
And Thank you to our sponsors, Tom Deady, author of Haven and the Clearing, Tenebris Press, an independent publisher of new weird horror from diverse and unsung voices around the world, Bucket of Blood Books and Records, Chicago's premier destination for new and used horror books and movies, Witty Books, an independent bookstore in Tulsa, Oklahoma, specializing in speculative fiction, small press titles, all things spooky. Find them online at wittybooks.com. My Horror Confessional, a horror movie podcast. Nightworms, a horror subscription service. Horror DNA, a horror website. Vic Carey, author of Thorazine Dreams. And Nightfire, publisher of books for the dead, the living, and everyone in between. Nightfire is the new horror imprint from the folks at Tor Books.
Live spooky, die spooky.
Rest in peace, Mac.